Okay, well, welcome everybody. Just a quick note, we were not able to get the closed captioning working for this presentation such that it would capture both of us. So we'll be making this presentation available and we'll include a transcript. So I was working away at my desk one day when this question from a prospective client came across Slack. Regarding accessibility, how do you determine situations in which a data visualization is not feasible? And it troubled me. I'm a big proponent of the value of thoughtful data presentation, yet I also wanted to provide a great experience for everyone. Is there a conflict here? My colleague Kim had these same thoughts, and we both agreed Dataviz and accessibility could coexist. In this session, we'll explain how. We'll first take a moment to make sure definitions are aligned, and then talk about the potential barriers to accessibility in data visualization. We'll then turn to ways to address the barriers so that you can present data in ways that provide many more audiences, not just the bare bones access, but truly great experiences. Along the way, we'll be highlighting how providing accessibility will make your product better for everyone. Finally, we're going to end with a couple thoughts about some even bigger possibilities we see in the future. So who are we? I'm Tim Shaw, Director of User Experience at Forum One. I'm the whiz for Dataviz and put the hot date in data. I've been interested in showcasing data for several years. I've been trying to bring inclusive research to this and all my work as much as I can. I'm joined today by...
Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Lowcraft. I'm a design director at Forum One. So that must mean that if Tim puts the hot date in data, then I must put the visual in visualization, which really makes sense because I'm a graphic designer. But in addition to that, I'm also really interested in accessibility. And I've been interested in it ever since I heard one of my designs read out loud by a screen reader. And a screen reader, in a nutshell, converts what you see on a page into speech or braille. And what it read wasn't pretty. Text was out of order, graphics were invisible. The story that I had worked so hard to tell was lost. And not because there was a problem with the screen reader, the problem was my design. Hearing design changed how I saw design. So I started learning more and I try to bring that learning to every project. A bit about Forum One, we work with mission-driven clients, so nonprofits, foundations, and government agencies to show their impact. And you can't think about impact anymore without thinking about data and data visualization. And you shouldn't think about data visualization, or any design for that matter, without also thinking about accessibility. Now, these are terms that you may hear all the time, but maybe less familiar with what they mean. So if you're not, we have a definition for that. First, what is data visualization? It is the graphic representation of data with a special focus on showing the relationship between data elements. Data visualizations really help translate data sets, so numbers, into easier to understand visuals. Examples include things like pie charts, bar graphs, line graphs, things like that. So what is accessibility? When we talk about accessibility today, we're talking about the practice of making products usable by as many people as possible, including people with disabilities and people with different situational needs. And to better set the stage, one might think that a conversation on accessibility and data visualization might center only on barriers for people who are blind or who have low vision, which is a big part of it, but there's more to consider, like barriers that affect access for people with mobility restrictions, or people with learning and thinking differences, or even just people trying to access information on mobile devices or in low bandwidth areas. So with all that said, Tim, let's dive in.
Yes, let's. So returning to our prospective client's question, which suggested trade-offs between accessibility and Dataviz. What was driving this question? What are the reasons this person was concerned and seeing trade-offs? Well, one easy answer is the term itself. Visualization comes to English speakers directly from the Latin for out of sight. It sounds, by its very nature, to be exclusive of those without full vision. Now, thinking in these terms alone, a problem becomes clear. If your visualization can only be experienced through sight, you're potentially excluding large numbers of audience members. Now, as Kim said, issues with sight are but one facet of accessibility, but it is certainly the case that many issues arise from not considering the needs of audiences with at least limited vision. Consider this clean and simple bar chart, which may be rendered as a static image or as part of a dynamic tool. It quickly and easily tells a story. Red and green have ascended, dark blue has fallen off, light blue is flatlined. Whether the data shows cases of some diseases or sales of some products, I know immediately where to investigate further. And with these bright colors, it jumps off the page at me. If I can't see anything, of course, I might get no such story. If I have limited vision, I might not be able to see the chart as a whole, or I might not be able to discern the colors well enough to receive the desired takeaway. Beyond visual issues, if I have low bandwidth, a big bold image might not load and I might miss the data. Maybe the goals and needs are bigger still, and one is developing an interactive data product using tools like the D3 JavaScript library. And there's a good reason to do so. With an interactive approach, people can better learn through a multi-step story or more easily explore the data to find their own insights. That's deep engagement and is letting your data make a difference. What's more, it can be fully up to date. So if that's the need, it's amazing. The fact is, though, that even though the visualization is now in code, accessibility is not at all ensured. While the code is doing dynamic things with the data, chances are it's still outputting a complex image or video file of some kind, and that content can't be read by a screen reader to help the visually impaired. An interactive tool probably needs some kind of controls, buttons, drop downs, that kind of thing. But these may be hard for someone with limited mobility to access, either by a keyboard or by a mouse alternative. And it's awfully easy to make interactive products so complex that they're hard to understand and go over the heads of key audiences. We'll talk about this more in a sec. First, whatever the style, color's a risk. Kim?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tim. We know that visualizations often rely on color. Like this example that shows a world population density map. The graphic uses blue to indicate low density areas, then a series of green, yellow, and orange until we get to red to indicate the highest density area. Now, color has a lot of benefits. It's a really powerful tool. It can help with memory and recall. It can tell us what items are related or which items should be understood as a sequence. And it can call attention to specific data items that we should be paying attention to. But the issue is people perceive color differently. And we're demonstrating that here. We're looking at the same world population density graphic as before, but this time through the lens of color blindness that affects mainly reds and greens. The color choices become problematic for two reasons. The first is that the contrast between the blue and the green make it difficult to tell the two apart. This means I may miss out on important information. The second problem is note that the color in the middle of the data set now stands out the most. This muddles the order of the data, which is confusing and could lead someone to misunderstand the information. Now, before we move on to the next slide, I have a courtesy warning. If you, like me, have sensitivity to motion, please look away for a moment. Our next potential barrier centers on animation and motion, and we've included an example here of bars moving quickly in opposite directions. Now, animation and motion can have many accessibility benefits. When done with intention, it can enhance people's ability to understand and interact with the data, but there are potential problems. And for those of you who looked away, it's now safe to look back. And those problems are, first, movement can be distracting and annoying, and this makes it hard to focus. Also, things that flash quickly have been known to trigger seizures, and in my case, certain movements at certain speeds can mess with a person's sense of balance and spatial awareness, and this can cause nausea, headaches, and dizziness. And this brings us to the last potential barrier we're going to touch on today, complex visuals. This is actually one of the most common barriers we see. Data visualizations can get pretty complicated pretty quickly, like this example that shows 20 variables across a period of time longer than what can even fit on the slide. And this kind of makes sense. You know, you've done a lot of amazing research, there's a lot you can say, and you want to connect all of those dots at once before somebody moves on. And granted, there are people who will appreciate this, but for others, it can become really, really overwhelming, especially for those who struggle to make visual connections or struggle to focus. And what about people who are less familiar with the topic, which could actually be the majority of people you're trying to reach with your data? If the goal of your data isn't immediately clear, how long will people actually stick around? So clearly all these things demonstrate that there are potential barriers, but now that we know what they are, the question becomes, what can we do about it? Tim?
Yeah, so as we look to solutions, I think we can remember that data visualizations are, at their heart, an accessibility solution in themselves. They're a way to reduce cognitive load on our poor brains. Most of us humans can't easily look at raw data sets and draw patterns and relationships. Presenting data in an engaging, focused way solves that need. So what can we actually do about the issues above? How can we create experiences that deliver data, that make it approachable for all, that enable everyone to recognize trends, compare data points, and in general, really use the data, and which ultimately move people to take some action with that data? The first step is to make sure you're planning accessibility in from the get-go. Now, we've probably all experienced the pain of trying to add some key functionality late in a project. It takes more time, budget and timeline may be gone, and the result, if it happens at all, feels tacked on. Every site user will sense that something kludgy happened, and nobody wants that. The accessible solution needs to be an integrated part of the initial design that will better serve everyone and not get lost in other priorities. So getting this right means you need a clear strategic foundation. What is the end goal of the data presentation? Which audiences will it motivate or empower to do what? What information does it need to convey to accomplish that end? How will different audiences understand and use this information, and what kinds of access does this imply? And finally, how can these different modes fit seamlessly together? So how can you make sure your integrated, accessible solution provides what is required? Make sure your research is fully inclusive. At the very least, this means your basic audience research includes all audience members, including those with different abilities and levels of experience, knowledge, and power. Better, if you can, is to engage those audiences more. Do deeper inclusive research like field studies or diary studies. Engage in co-creation with those audiences so you have their direct design input. Maintain ongoing audience involvement in discussions and reviews, and evaluate your work over time through inclusive usability testing, including with those using various adaptive technologies. Have you ever found yourself looking at a visual and wondering, what on earth am I supposed to do with this? These are the cases of the complexity Kim mentioned. So that strategic planning I mentioned above, that's going to help you with a second key consideration, keeping your visualizations simple. Now, as Kim noted, this is hard. You've collected all this great data and you want to share it all. Most audiences, though, don't have the time or the capacity to review myriad slices and dices of a data set. And throwing all the stories at people limits the impact of the few that really matter. By focusing your efforts on the few stories and analyses that will best drive your goals, you're more likely to make a product that is well designed for all audiences. For example, audiences with neurological and cognitive differences will be better able to process what you're saying, and you'll help those who are busy or new to the subject matter. Audiences with visual issues will be more easily served by clearer alternatives, and you'll help anyone who prefers other media for consuming data. Now, some data products are designed for exploring, and you can't or you don't want to limit audience takeaways. Even then, make it clear what options there are for exploration and create logical paths and layers to structure that exploration. You can always tell additional stories through follow-up products like companion blog posts. Don't pack it all into one thing. Now that you have your goal and you've mapped out a plan, think beyond vision. To improve accessibility of your data visualizations, you should be asking, how else might somebody experience this information? Making the data and insights available in other well-presented forms is a key part of this. This is the Nuclear Threat Institute's NTI Index site. The initial focus of the overview level is this map, which is a complex SVG and is thus not accessible to a screen reader. Note, though, that there are two other integrated views at the top level, both of which include a table view. The table provides great access for those unable to read the map. Those using a screen reader, and this is the default view for them, can hear the data as it is read to them in a logical way. The table also, though, serves a unique valuable purpose for all audiences. It is how anyone can sort and list across dimensions and thus see countries ranked. Making an already desired capability part of the alternative to the map solved multiple cases in one shot. So charts, be they static or dynamic, can typically have a partnered table view to serve different audience needs and preferences. In the simplest of cases, data could be placed clearly in alt text. In really complex ones, a downloadable spreadsheet is a solution, though if you're at this latter point, it may be a signal you need to simplify what you're conveying or break it into steps. You're hearing a deliberate theme. Different humans interact with content in different ways, either through need or through preference. We recently usability tested a National Assessment for Educational Progress, or NAEP, product. We got clear confirmation that while some people prefer graphs, they see utility in tables, and some prefer tables even if they see utility in graphs. By helping those with different abilities, you end up helping many others who simply have different information processing preferences or needs of the moment. So that leads us into a related topic. Kim?
Yeah, so now that you've offered your data in different formats, the question becomes, what else can you do? And the answer is to contextualize and humanize the data. Like Tim mentioned, data visualizations do more than just deliver data. They show trends and relationships. But if I can't see the visual or I have trouble making connections, it will be harder for me to find those trends and relationships if a table is my only other available option. And that's where thoughtful text descriptions come in. Be sure to describe the takeaways of your data and answer, what story is your data telling? These text-based descriptions explain visual cues in a format that not only works with assistive technologies like screen readers, but it also gives really important context to everybody. Now, this doesn't mean you have to create these super detailed data-driven stories, although those are really cool, but that's a whole other conversation. It can actually be fairly simple. We're showing an example of a static visualization on a web page. The next time you want to post a static visual, try a few things out. Include a descriptive title that gives people an idea of what the visual is about. Add a sentence or two that highlights key information and explains the general trends and takeaways. This is going to free up your alt text to describe the graphic itself. The more creative your data presentation is, the more descriptive your alt text can become. And you should also provide a link to the data spreadsheet so people can explore that data further if they wish. And then I always say, do a quick test. Cover up the image, pretend it's not there, and read the text, as well as the alt text out loud. If it's clear and no information is missing, then you've successfully made an inaccessible image more accessible. But what about dynamic visualizations? You may be thinking, how will I be able to write something for every possible scenario someone might encounter? This is an example from NYU's City Health dashboard. It shows the COVID local risk index for Little Rock, Arkansas, as compared to 500 other cities. This is a case where the team defined a template text description for each of the 6 metric types involved in the visualization. The text displays the same for every city, and the values actually dynamically change. So just like that, you have an explanation for each scenario someone might come across. And this is really great because even if I couldn't see the visual or I didn't understand it, I can read or hear the description telling me the main takeaway. And a fun data fact, in a recent NAEP usability study, we looked at how people respond to this approach, and 7 of the 14 participants, so half, used the text as opposed to the graph to find meaning at some point. So these text descriptions can really do a lot to improve your visualizations in a meaningful way for your audiences. Our next consideration centers on design and UX. And a big part of accessibility is about creating a good user experience, no matter how somebody experiences information. So naturally, design and UX decisions really play an important role in the final accessibility of a data visualization. Now, this is a really big topic with a lot to cover. So we wanted to touch on just a few tips based on things that we've learned from recent projects and usability studies. The first of these tips is use color, but use it strategically. When you use color, be sure to consider color contrast. Color contrast is important not only for text, but also the UI elements in your data visualization. All of these things should pass recommended guidelines. And as a general rule, don't use color alone to indicate meaning. The next thing is hierarchy. Be sure to guide your audiences through the visualization and the surrounding controls in a meaningful way. Target areas. This is something designers tend to overlook. Design larger target areas so it's easier for people to tap and select items within your visualization. And then be sure to use labels and legends so people don't have to guess or search for the meaning for anything that's within your visualization. The last point is consistency. Maintaining consistency in your design and layout improves learning and people's ability to navigate and understand information. And to give all of this more context, Tim is actually going to walk us through some examples.
Yeah, so in terms of color usage, here's the NTI index map again. Given that different colors appear differently to different people, a safe bet is to use gradient scales, which will consistently show correct relationships among data when the hues appear differently. With maps in particular, it's hard not to use just color. But gradients allow color to have meaning and cause fewer issues. They will also, as it happens, help maintain visual harmony and lower distraction when there are many data points. Now, ideally, we don't rely solely on color. So here's a nape chart. We do use a blue gradient to give some meaning, but we also introduce different shapes to make this graphic table more accessible. And we have seen that this has helped everyone get the story. Hierarchy is important. On this nape chart, note how the drop-downs are at the top because they control all below. The title is below the controls because it's governed by them, but above the chart because it describes that data. This structured layout makes the presentation clear to anybody, but it especially provides a logical framework for somebody with mobility issues to tab through the experience. Note the drop-downs are also above the link to see a table view. The table here provides the same interactive capability as the chart, optimized for the different presentation. It's not some static appendage to a dynamic tool. Target areas. Here's an issue we need to fix. The question mark buttons or help buttons are the only tap target here. They're only about 22 by 22 pixels, too small for a low mobility tester we met. They should include the label as part of the tap target. Guidelines recommend at least 46 by 46 pixels, but feedback from people suggests that even 46 pixels in just one direction is helpful. Finally, consistency makes data displays clearer for all, as Kim said. On City Health Dashboard, the same visualization appears in nearly all views. Sometimes it's smaller and simpler, sometimes big and detailed. But once someone learns to interpret it once, which is already easy, they can make sense of it anywhere. Note also the gradient usage and the different shapes used to mark the key points. Now, you might guess that there are technical practices to do as well.
Yes, there are definitely technical aspects that you should be considering, and that's why our final consideration is to build for inclusion. A benefit of dynamic visualizations is that people can interact with them. They can compare the data pieces that they want to compare, and they can explore and draw their own conclusions. As a sighted person with full mobility, I can hover over data points and I can choose to compare the items that I deem relevant. But if I use assistive technologies like a screen reader or a switch device, then navigating and interacting with these visualizations is often just not possible. If the designer had followed the previous considerations, then yes, I'd have text descriptions, and yes, I could access the raw data, but I still might not be able to interact with the graphic itself. And that's where developers step in. There are ways in which developers can build visualizations that can improve the experience for people who rely on assistive technologies. And this will give more people the freedom to find their own data story. And for our developers that are interested in learning more, here are some quick tips from our development team. You always want to be sure you're starting with semantic markup, so HTML, then use ARIA to provide more context when that markup falls short. And ARIA is just a set of additional HTML attributes that can be used to improve accessibility. But it's not a magic wand, and overuse or improper use can actually increase accessibility errors. So if you want to learn more about ARIA, I encourage you to go to the w3.org website. There's a lot of great information there. The next tip is to use libraries and tools that have accessibility considerations built in. Examples are high charts or SAS. And you should also use SVGs for your images, but then be sure to add markup directly within the images to help make them more accessible. Other things that you can do are ensure intuitive keyboard focus and no keyboard traps. This will make sure that people who rely on keyboard navigation can tab through the visualization in an intentional way and that they won't get stuck or trapped at any point in the process. Earlier, we had talked about potential risks with animation or motion. So you just want to make sure that you're being really intentional about your animation choices and plan to allow for reduce motion or stop animation. This way, audiences can really decide what works best for them. And last, but far from least, is include people with disabilities in the testing and solution process. Really, this, along with all of the other considerations we've discussed today, will make a big difference in the accessibility of your visualizations. And Tim, hopefully all of these considerations help answer your client's original question about the trade-offs.
Yes, clearly the question is moot. What we have shown are some achievable ways to make experiences better for all audiences now. But we know we can do better. And we want to leave you with a couple ideas we are seeing that could bring data presentation to another level. In short, we need to explore what other senses we can use to experience and analyze data. Now, a few years ago, I was reading something about Dataviz and access, and the thought popped into my head. If you can't see data, could you hear it? Happily, other smarter people had the same thought, and data sonification, presenting data in terms of changes in sound, is becoming a thing. Now, this seems exciting for the visually impaired, as well as, perhaps, anyone who is more of an auditory learner. Sound enables a whole new kind of data storytelling. So I found this example recently. A designer named Brian Fu built this piece where a song plays as the map shows the path of the 2 train in New York City from central Brooklyn to the northern Bronx. The vibrancy of the song in volume and orchestration is keyed to the income level of the neighborhood through which the train is traveling. So it begins quiet and simple in Flatbush, builds into downtown Brooklyn, is loud and powerful through much of Manhattan, falls off in Harlem, and becomes quiet and simple again in the South Bronx. You hear the income inequality in New York City. There's also tactile data, or as I'm insisting on coining it, data tactilification. Many of us who became parents in the last 3 decades or so have had the joy of meeting our child before birth and maybe beginning to learn about them via a sonogram printout. If you were a blind parent, though, you could not have this moment. Well, that's changing. These are images of blind parents meeting their babies through a 3D printing from sonogram data. They can have this amazing moment with their baby in a form, touch, that is generally highly accessible to them. And the joy is pretty clear, and you can now say, "Aw." Who knows what else is possible? Maybe we'll even get data olfactication. When the data is moving in a positive direction, it emits scents of flowers and exotic spices. When in negative territory, you get notes of high school boys' locker room during equipment manager's strike after Bean Burrito Day in the cafeteria. We'll see, or smell. Finally, we want to end this section by returning to this point, because it is still too emergent. The only way we will make jumps in serving everyone well is if we include everyone in our work. We are seeing more attention paid to inclusive data design practices, but please be the future and weave all less well-served audiences explicitly into design and evaluation processes. So we hope we've given you great ideas to improve your data visualization projects. And we're happy now to take questions. I don't know the best way if the chat room is best, or if people are able to speak, we're happy to do that as well. Are people able to unmute and ask any questions? I'm not sure.
We have a question in the chat. How do you make the screen default to the table for maps? How did you make the default for screen readers, the table, in the example you shared previously?
Yeah, so this is sort of more of a developer's question, but I believe it's a CSS decision that it looks at the type of device that is hitting the page and presents appropriately for that device. If anybody else is able to.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we have any developers.
Sounds like I got it okay. Any tools you can recommend to help evaluate designs in progress? Kim, that seems one that's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do 3 things. One is obviously checking color contrast. I like to use WebAIM's color contrast checker. I can just type in my values and I double check contrast that way. There's also additional plugins and different tools that you can use if you wanted to check directly in your design files. Another thing I do is I always want to make sure I'm reviewing my designs through the different lenses of color blindness to make sure that no meaning is lost depending on how people perceive color. And I use a plugin called Color Oracle, and I can include a link to that when we send out this presentation. But what it allows you to do is look at your designs through different lenses, so you can kind of double check that. And then the third thing that I do is, I mean, I've actually tried to learn as much as I possibly can about different ways people experience information. I can also link you to some posters that provide a really great overview of just certain design decisions that you should keep in the back of your mind to help you make clearer, cleaner designs along the way. So I will be sure to include links to all of that.
Cool. You have suggested resources for more examples of data sonification and data tactilification.
Yeah.
Kim, did you have anything on the tactile front?
I was going to say I have, I can send some more examples, but a really great way is just to go in and Google. You're going to find all of these things that people are trying, as well as some really great discussions people are having around like what's working, you know, what's not working. Is really, really interesting. So I encourage you to look that up, as well as what other people are doing, and I can link to some of those articles that I've been reading as well.
On the sonification front, this is something that I honestly I learned more about just this week as I was preparing for this presentation. The slide that has the story about New York points to actually an article, and it has actually four videos. I think they were all done by this Brian Fu of some different flavors of the same kind of sound-driven data storytelling. But I also Googled it, and Yeah, I think it's still fairly emergent. It looks like it's something that's being built into some data packages. So like high charts includes it. It's not clear to me in what way. That's something that we have, a package that we have used in the past, but I don't have much personal experience. But it looks like it's something that's starting to be considered and would be something that could be leveraged in some or other out of the box way from a number of different available tool sets and libraries and things. Anything else?
We have our email addresses at the bottom of the screen. So if you have any more questions and want to reach out to us, we're happy to stay in touch. And Tim Shaw is TSHAW@forum1.com. And I am Kay Lowcraft at Forum One. So KLOCRAF as in Frank, T as in Tom, at forum1.com.
And Forum One is FORUMONE, all one word.
Good teamwork. Thanks, Tim.
We're going to read it out. Let's read it out. So yes, hopefully we've given you some good insight for your work, and we look forward to seeing the awesome things that you all will create.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.